An important concept to understand before moving into JavaScript and jQuery is the Document Object Model, or the DOM. The DOM is best defined as a tree of objects created by your web browser when the web page loads. Your web browser uses the DOM to interpret the page and display its contents. Let's take a look at the model illustrated as a flowchart. At the top of the model hierarchy, we have our actual HTML document. For example, index.html or main.html, whatever the case may be. Inside our HTML document, we have our root element, which is the HTML open tag. Inside the root element, we have several other elements, for example, the head tag and title tag. The root element also holds the body element, which can contain links, paragraphs, headings, divs, and just about any other element we can use to develop the content of our page. Each of these elements can have text content and attributes. For example, the A element contains an href attribute, which contains a textual link. The DOM is important to understand because it allows the elements on a web page to be dynamically changed or updated using JavaScript or the jQuery library. This means we can change HTML elements, attributes, and CSS styles when different events are triggered. For example, if a button is clicked or a page is loaded, just to name a few. We can specify which elements to update or change on an event using three methods. First, we can use the tag name. Say, for example, we wanted to change all the text contained within h1 tags to red. In this case, we would specify the h1 tags in our JavaScript. If we wanted to change a specific element, we can refer to it using an ID. For example, we can assign the ID equals text to a paragraph element. So PID equals text. We can then modify the element or any of its attributes using JavaScript. Thirdly, and similar to the ID method, we can also refer to an element by assigning it a class. For example, if we wanted to modify a list element, a specific list element, we could attach the class bullet1, for example. And we could change it using JavaScript as well. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at a few examples of how we can change elements inside the document object model. In this lesson, we'll take a look at a basic example of DOM manipulation using JavaScript. In the JavaScript portion of this course, we'll cover many more methods. Here, we have a basic HTML document. Inside the body tag, we have a JavaScript function named changeText. This function will change any text contained within an element to the words new text. Outside of our script, we have an h1 tag with an onClick event attached to it. The onClick event will execute the changeText function. This means that the text inside the h1 element, click here, will change to the words new text, as defined in our function. Let's take a look at this in our web browser to confirm it works. You can see that when I click on the words click here, it changes to new text. And so we've manipulated the document object model. So far, we've worked with HTML and CSS. We know that both these programming languages instruct our web browser on how our web page should be displayed. We also learned that HTML and CSS are static languages that do not interact with users. In this section of the course, we'll be exploring a very powerful client-side programming language known as JavaScript. When we say client-side, it means the language communicates with our web browser to allow user to web page interactivity. Client-side languages differ from server-side languages such as PHP, which we'll cover later on. Server-side languages communicate not with a web browser, but with a web server. JavaScript can be used to implement many different types of interactive features on a web page. Let's take a look at some examples of JavaScript functions that interact with users. This JavaScript code calculates the amount of characters a user has typed into a text area. Once you type in the line of text and press the Calculate Characters button, you'll see that this line of text has 23 characters. This JavaScript code displays an error message if more than 10 words were typed into a text area. This is the pop-up alert that appears if more than 10 words are typed in. This JavaScript code validates a form to make sure that the required fields were completed. I've purposely put an incorrect email address and left the other fields blank. These fields are required. So once we click Submit, we receive an error message saying that some of the required fields were not completed. This is done using JavaScript validation. We'll explore much more advanced validation techniques than this. This is just a basic example. This JavaScript code ensures a user agrees to the terms and conditions of a web page in order to submit a form. If I do not check off this checkbox here, you'll notice I get a pop-up message saying that we must check the box to continue. And again, this is another JavaScript function. This is a slightly more advanced script. It's a tic-tac-toe game. And the purpose is to line up the X's or O's all in one straight line, diagonally, horizontally, or vertically. And so you can see if you lose, a pop-up message appears indicating that the game is over and you've lost. These are just a few basic examples of what JavaScript can be used for. JavaScript does have some limitations. We've already touched on one in that it cannot be used to communicate with a web server. JavaScript cannot be forced onto a user's web browser either. Remember, JavaScript is a client-side language, meaning if your user has turned off JavaScript support in their web browser, your script will not work. Also, if the user's web browser is outdated, it may not allow certain JavaScript functions to work correctly. Note that almost all modern web browsers support JavaScript by default when installed. Many people also confuse JavaScript with Java. Note that these are two languages and they are not the same. Java is a much more powerful and complex language in the same category as C and C++. JavaScript is an object-oriented language. This means that attributes of an object are contained within variables. For example, if we want to describe a person, we'll refer to this person as the object. We would typically use attributes such as name, height, weight, gender, and age. The values of these attributes will vary or differ from person to person. Another word for attributes is variables. These variables will contain the values for each person. As we progress through this section, you'll gain a better understanding of this concept and the importance of working with variables. Similar to CSS, JavaScript functions are most commonly placed in between the open and close head tags. The reason for this is because the head portion of an HTML page gets loaded before any other part of the HTML document. So if you were to put your JavaScript code right before the closing body tag, any JavaScript calls made to functions by your page as it loads will result in an error. Let's take a look at an example of a JavaScript function located in our head tag and called upon in our body. We won't get too much into the HTML here because by now most of this HTML code should look familiar. This JavaScript code will calculate your age in dog years. A year of a person's life is equivalent to 7 years of a dog's life. Let's preview this file before we take a look at the code. As you can see, we input our age in the first input field. I'll put 1 just for demonstration. Once we press calculate, the JavaScript function is called. It reads the value in the first input and multiplies it by 7. It places the result in the second input. In the code, we can see that the script for the JavaScript function is located in the head tag. The function itself is called cYears. This function takes the value of the form element my age and multiplies it by 7. The result is then displayed in the form element dog age. The entire function is activated when the user clicks the calculate button. This is when the JavaScript function is called. We can see an on-click event attached to the button. We'll explore different events later in this course. JavaScript can be inserted into a separate document and called when necessary. This is known as an external JavaScript file. You might recall we did the same with our external CSS file. Let's take the JavaScript function in our previous lesson and insert it into a new file. I'm going to copy out the entire function. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to create a new file and paste it. Now I'm going to save this file as dogage.js. JS stands for JavaScript. Now in the head tag, we need to call this script. And we'll do that by adding a source attribute to the script tag. Now we'll save this file, and I'll preview it in my browser just to make sure it works. We can see that the script is working, so we know that the JavaScript file was called successfully. There's a couple of advantages to using external JavaScript files. First, it makes the HTML code and JavaScript code easier to maintain. Cached JavaScript files also increase the speed at which the web page loads. There are different methods we can use for outputting data using JavaScript. The first we'll explore is the document.write method. Let's take a look at an example to see how this works. In this HTML page, we have a script that will display the result of a simple calculation using document.write. You can see here we have two values and we want to add them together, 5 plus 6. The result of this equation will be displayed in the content area of our web browser because we have attached the document.write function next to it. So here's the web browser, and we can see that the results are displayed beneath this line of text. So if we were to change the equation and save our file, it would update the value. And so it's that simple. That's how the document.write function works. Another method of outputting data is the window alert. This method will output the data in a pop-up message box. So let's replace the document.write with window.alert and see the difference. So now we can see that we get a pop-up message box with the value 13. The inner HTML function allows us to output data in an HTML element. For example, here we have a script that will calculate the results of a simple calculation, 6 plus 3. The script will display the result in the HTML element containing the ID math. That's what the getElementById function means. We've applied the ID to this paragraph tag. That means the results of the JavaScript output will be displayed here. We can see the results in our web browser. 9 is the result that is outputted once the JavaScript function computes 6 plus 3. We can update these values to output different results.